What I love about the gardening shows is that it gives you a chance to see where gardening's at the moment and to compare different styles and types of gardening and planting and border with each other, so that if you're thinking of doing anything different in your garden, then you can think, oh, I really like that, or gosh, no, that's even nicer. So it gives us all ideas for our gardens. I've just come back from BBC Gardeners World Live in Birmingham, and I've picked out the 10 or so ideas which I think would translate really well into any of our gardens. It's Alexandra here from the Middle-Sized Garden YouTube channel and blog, and I'll put links to any resources I mention, names of flowers where I've got it, and to the tips in the description below with a timestamp, so you can jump, if you like, to the bit of the show that most interests you. And if you're new here, the Middle-Sized Garden uploads weekly with tips, ideas and inspiration for your garden. So if you'd like to see the videos when you open up YouTube, click the subscribe button. They're absolutely free. And if you'd like YouTube to let you know when a new video is uploaded, then tap the notifications bell. In terms of planting, the two strong directions that I saw in quite a few different plant gardens and borders at BBC Gardeners World Live were a sort of jungle tropical look, which is particularly good for small gardens and for balconies and courtyards, and also a sort of meadow planting, a much more rural, rustic, relaxed look. So going in on those two first, I visited Kate Mason, whose garden was sponsored by eBay, so everything on it had to be available online. Kate's border was sort of loosely jungle inspired and also very wildlife friendly, because as she points out, jungle inspired planting can often mean lots and lots of foliage, and if you want to be wildlife friendly, it's a really good idea to have as many flowers in your garden as you can all year round. So she picked this beautiful Angelica, which was buzzing with bees and wasps when I was talking to her, and also some Echinacea, and also they created the colour in the garden. Kate loves purple, so she chose that as her starting colour, and the opposite to purple on the colour wheel is orange. So in order to create the kind of impact that a tropical garden needs, you've got these very bright colours and you've also got a great deal of contrast. The big leaves and the layers are a big part of tropical and jungle planting. Of course, many of the plants in a jungle type garden are quite tender. In the UK, we very roughly equate to USDA's hardiness zones 7 to 9 because we have quite mild winters. But even so, plants like that really big-leafed Colocasia Black Magic will not survive in our winters, even in the mildest parts. Although some of the other colocasias, Kate said, actually will, if you're quite sheltered and you pile it up with mulch, they actually will come through. So firstly, I think that's a good tip, which is if you want to grow tender plants, check the different varieties, because some of them may be hardy to your area and some may not. But the other thing she does, and this is really my kind of second idea, is that she treats her plants as indoor-outdoor plants. She's got quite a few plants in this border which she would take into her own house in the winter, where they become house plants. Some plants, like Begonia luxurians, go quite dormant in the winter, so they don't make very brilliant house plants. I know because I've tried Begonia luxurians inside and out. But for instance, the Colocasia Black Magic, Kate says, really fills her house with a real sort of tropical impact. And at the back of her border, she's got a little table set with various house plants like Sansevieria, which is mother-in-law's tongue. And those are plants that can live on your terrace in the summer and then live in your house in the winter. The one warning I would say from my own experience is do just keep an eye on the early frosts, because I lost quite a few begonias by keeping them on the terrace in the summer. And then I just left them out a week too long and I didn't get them in and I lost them. So moving on to the meadow-inspired border. This border was created by Tina Worboys and it won Best in Show in Gardeners World Live. And I can see why it did, because it is very, very pretty. Anyone who's been following my garden tips and tours from the month will know that I've been trying to grow two small patches of mini meadow wildlife friendly lawn in the front garden, and it has been a bit difficult, and I think it can be difficult to have small patches of meadow lawn. And Tina says the answer is to have a meadow-inspired border where you use some meadow flowers mixed with some cottage garden favourites, things like cosmos and gaura, and even the old roses, the very traditional species roses like dog roses. And this really looks incredibly pretty, and it's a very good compromise, and of course it's hugely friendly for pollinators. So I did rather fall in love with this look, and I might try it in one of my borders next year. The next tip that I think emerged was think about texture as well as colour when you're deciding on planting schemes. For many people, texture in a border is about foliage contrast, and actually that is a really good way of doing it. You get large leaves and small leaves, you get thin leaves and round leaves, you get variegated leaves and dark leaves. But you can also do this with flower colour. So I particularly loved what Kate Mason did with these two Echinaceas. You wouldn't know it, but these are actually two different colours of Echinacea. They're called Adobe Orange and Coral. And she's put them together, and of course it just gives a lovely textured look. And of course, if you're trying to decide between two shades that are very similar and not sure which to have, well, have them both. Another really strong direction at the show was this nostalgia, rustic, rural feel. Now, of course, no one can call nostalgia a new idea, but there are times when people seem to crave nostalgic looks much more than other times. And I think that after 2 years that we've just had, I think many people do want to see things that remind them of memories of their past, perhaps of sunnier summers, of happier times. And while garden design a few years ago went through a very sort of formal, very contemporary, quite hard-edged look, it's now much more about do-it-yourself, rustic, rural, using natural materials. And I thought this border here by Victoria Legge, which was inspired by Great Dixter, was a very good example of that. Great Dixter has got a lot of chestnut trees, and they do chestnut hurdles, and as well as using the chestnut hurdles for fencing, they also make little mini sets of chestnut hurdles which they use where you've got clumps of annuals that just need to be held back from a border. They don't put them all along a border edge. It'll just be a clump of annuals which you start off planting maybe 3 or 4 or 10 individual little annuals, and they sit there and they're miles away from each other, and they, you know, there's no way of giving them support because they're far too small. And then suddenly, before you know where you are, they're a great cloud of cosmos or tagetes, and they're sort of tipping over the grass. So what they do at Great Dixter, and Victoria has put this here, is put these little mini chestnut hurdle edges, and it's just a pretty and it's rustic, and you can just put it where you need it in front of a clump of annuals. And I saw a similar thing being done with mini picket fencing as well, and I also saw sort of rustic willow obelisks. So all of that feel is just about feeling that things are handcrafted and the way they were 50 or 100 years ago. But as a bit of a contrast, I then go on to saying that what has been new recently is outdoor cushions, because it always used to be that outdoor cushions were a bit of a nuisance because you had to take them in and take them out, and when it rains and everything like that. But there were quite a few gardens at the show which really accentuated their colour schemes with cushions, and that's something you could do at home, because a lot of cushions are now weatherproof or weather resistant. So I imagine it's still probably not a great idea to leave them out in a very long storm, but if there's a sort of sudden rainfall, it's not going to affect them. And I went online when I got home and saw a great range of outdoor cushions from different designers. In this very pretty garden by designer Lynn Cordall, the yellow cushions really pick up on that yellow and blue planting, and I thought that was just so attractive. And one of my favourite gardens was this, which is called the Woodland Fall garden. And the purple cushions here really made the purple planting sing. There were lots of things I loved about this garden. They've got a sort of water feature that comes down and trickles along the top of that stone table, and then goes down and then runs in a little rill along the garden, and then forms a pebble pond, and there's a fire pit in it. And I don't know about the practicalities of having a fire pit in a pond. It's just a little bit of water around the edges really, rather than an actual pond, but it does strike me that it's quite a good safety precaution to have water near a fire pit. This garden won Best in Show, and that is very deservedly, I think. I think everybody loved it. The next thing that came across very strongly is recycling and upcycling is really big at the moment. And of course you couldn't call recycling a new idea, but I think we've all had quite a difficult few years with supply chains being very disrupted by a number of factors. And people haven't been able to get the fencing and the pergolas and the ornaments and the pots that they've originally wanted. And people have had to sort of make do. And also people are increasingly concerned about not putting in too much into landfill, not throwing away too much, and of course saving money, because of course recycling really is about saving money for you. And there was one garden that took recycling to an extreme, and I think very few of us would want to go quite that far, but I do think it was fun to think about the ideas that it has in it, and that was based on bicycle parts. It was theoretically a garden designed for cycling enthusiasts by Hannah Leonard and Armstrong Landscapes. But I think what it says is actually you can probably use anything in any way if you really think about it. There were really attractive perennial flowers made of sprockets and cogs and things that I probably don't know the exact name of. And they used bicycle wheels in the fencing, and they created a pergola of bicycle wheels. And the actual hard landscaping surface was a kind of mini velodrome, and as I say, I don't think most people would want to go that far, but I think it does show what you can do with something that you were going to throw away. Another thing I noticed as being quite unusual and really quite helpful, I think, for us in our gardens is making a statement with your walls or your fencing. Designers often talk about using vertical space, particularly in smaller gardens where space is quite short, and typically that's been about having an obelisk or a climber or a pergola or a tree and then growing a climber through a tree. But actually your walls and your fencing are fantastic vertical space, and you can make quite an impact with them. And in this garden, which is by designers Guns N' Roses, they theoretically created a garden to go with a 1960s house for a busy professional couple. Now, most 1960s houses don't have brutalist architecture, that tended to be flats, but brutalist architecture was an architectural theme of the time. So while they're not probably exactly echoing the architecture of this particular imaginary house, nevertheless they are taking the architectural themes of the time, and I think that looks very good. Because I get quite a lot of queries of people saying that they don't feel their house has an architecture, particularly if it's modern. But this, I think, works very well. And so they've made a sort of brutalist, modernist, big statement wall. And what this means is that it carries most of the impact of the garden. A busy professional couple, they do want low maintenance, so it's all grasses, there's not a great deal in the way of flowers. But I think that's fine. We all need different things from our garden. And doing something special with your walls or your fencing means you don't have to try quite so hard with the planting. Another thing that came across very strongly was that planting in containers have really come of age. So many people live in rented accommodation, or they have balconies, or they have courtyards, and they can't have borders as such. But actually you can put together a group of pots as a border, very much as Claus Dalby did in one of my videos, and I'll put that in the description below. He has 3,000 dahlias in pots, and he arranges them like a border, and you wouldn't actually know they were pots until you actually look really closely at the ground. But there were quite a few sort of border plantings in pots at the show, and I think this is something that is really lovely if you want to be able to take your garden with you, or you just simply don't have the ground space for a border. The only thing, of course, is that plants in pots are very dependent on you. They can't get either food or water from the ground. What Claus Dalby does is that he actually does water his 3,000 pots with a hose. He doesn't have an irrigation system, he told me, but he plants the pots with compost and with a long-term slow-release feed. Now, as gardens get smaller, there is the question of what you do about a lawn. It's really difficult in a garden that's used to keep a small patch of lawn going. One of the options is to have more hard landscaping. Obviously hard landscaping, and indeed all the other options, artificial turf, gravel, everything has a consequence. It has a cost to you and to the environment. And so the choices really are for you to make for yourself. But if you want to make sure that you have enough planting for wildlife, but you still have a reasonably easy to look after surface for your garden, a lot of people are having larger terraces and larger borders and getting rid of the lawn. And if you're going to do this, it does look good to mix the hard landscaping materials because it breaks up the space a bit. And I saw this done very attractively both in the Marshall's garden and in the Association of Professional Landscapers garden designed by David Stevens. I just thought this looked very nice, and of course you could pick up one material as echoing your house architecture and then another could be something that contrasts with it. I did also rather like this sea-inspired garden, designed by Julianne Fernandez. And by the way, I've put the full names of the designers and the gardens in the links in the description below with timestamps so that you can actually see the full names and make sure also that I've got the names right. It's often quite difficult at a show to make sure you really line up the right gardens to the right designers. But this garden has chosen a sort of British seaside fisherman's hut and put an outdoor kitchen in it. And it opens up, if you want to use the outdoor kitchen, the hut opens up. And I think that's a really clever idea, and it's something you could do with a different theme if you wanted to. If you're interested in more garden design ideas, don't miss our garden design playlist at the end of this video. And if there are any ideas in this video that you think you'd like to hear more about, then please do let me know in the comments below, and thank you for watching. Goodbye.